Commander Jake Morrison gripped the tactical display as another Zephyrian battlecruiser materialized from hyperspace, its crystalline hull gleaming like a predator's tooth against the starfield. The bridge of the UES Aurora fell silent except for the steady pulse of proximity alarms that had been screaming for the past 6 hours. "That makes 14 of their capital ships, sir," reported Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez from her sensor station, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. Morrison nodded grimly, his weathered face illuminated by the red combat lighting that had become their constant companion since the Zephyrian hegemony declared humanity a galactic contamination 3 months ago. The Aurora, humanity's newest and most advanced warship, had been conducting deep space reconnaissance when the alien armada appeared at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, but what should have been a routine survey mission had transformed into something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. The Zephyrians, with their superior numbers and technology that had dominated the galaxy for over 2 millennia, had expected to find primitive humans cowering in metal boxes, easy prey for their bioengineered weapons and quantum disruptors. Instead, they discovered something that would fundamentally alter their understanding of warfare itself. Captain Williams, incoming transmission from the lead Zephyrian vessel, announced Communications Officer Tyler Brooks, his hands dancing across holographic interfaces as he worked to decode the alien frequencies. Captain Rebecca Williams, Morrison's superior and the Aurora's commanding officer, stepped forward with the kind of calm authority that had earned her respect throughout the Solar Defense Corps. She was a tall woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform bearing the scars of countless battles fought in humanity's expansion beyond Earth. "Put it through, Lieutenant," she ordered, her voice carrying the weight of decisions that could determine the fate of her species. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the elongated features of a Zephyrian war prime, its 4 golden eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence as its translation matrix processed human speech patterns. "Primitive mammals," the alien's voice resonated through the bridge with harmonic undertones that made several crew members wince. "You have trespassed in territory claimed by the hegemony for 7,000 cycles. Surrender your vessel and submit to processing, or be eliminated along with the rest of your contaminated species." Williams exchanged a glance with Morrison, both officers recognizing the moment that would define not just their mission, but potentially the entire trajectory of human civilization among the stars. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their assessment. They assumed that humanity's relatively recent emergence from their home system indicated technological inferiority and tactical predictability. What they failed to understand was that humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare against their own kind, developing strategies and technologies born from necessity, desperation, and an innate understanding that survival often depended on thinking beyond conventional parameters. "War Prime," Williams replied, her tone respectful but unwavering. "Humanity appreciates your generous offer, but we must respectfully decline. We're explorers, not conquerors, but we're also not in the habit of surrendering without cause." The Zephyrian's expression shifted to what might have been amusement in a human, but on its alien features appeared more like a predator sizing up wounded prey. "Your species exhibits the same arrogance we have observed in 17 other primitive civilizations before their inevitable extinction. We shall demonstrate the futility of resistance." As the transmission ended, Morrison found himself thinking about Earth, about the billions of humans who had no idea that first contact with an advanced alien civilization was occurring at this very moment, 300 light-years from home. The Aurora represented humanity's finest achievements in engineering and military technology, but it was also something more. It was the embodiment of human adaptability, creativity, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried their species from scattered tribes to interstellar explorers. "All hands, this is Captain Williams," her voice echoed throughout the ship's corridors via the internal communication system, reaching every member of the Aurora's crew of 800 souls. "We stand at a crossroads in human history. Today, we represent not just ourselves, but every human who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. We may be outnumbered, and we may be facing technology we don't fully understand, but we carry something our enemies cannot comprehend, the accumulated wisdom of humanity's greatest strategic minds and the unbreakable will of a species that has never known true defeat." The Zephyrian fleet began moving into attack formation, their ship's bioluminescent weapons systems charging with an ominous blue glow that painted the darkness of space in threatening hues, unaware that they were about to encounter something that would reshape galactic politics forever. The first Zephyrian plasma barrage lit up space like a deadly aurora, streams of superheated energy that could vaporize asteroids racing toward the Aurora at near light speed, but Commander Morrison had already anticipated this opening gambit based on tactical analyses of previous alien encounters with other species. "Evasive pattern Delta 7, he called out, his fingers flying across the helm controls as the Aurora twisted through a complex three-dimensional spiral that utilized the ship's revolutionary inertial dampening system, a human innovation that allowed for maneuvers no other known species had achieved. The Zephyrian War Prime, aboard his flagship Dominion's Edge, watched in surprise as the primitive human vessel seemed to dance between his fleet's coordinated fire patterns with an elegance that defied conventional physics. Lieutenant Rodriguez monitored the alien formations from her sensor array, noting how their ships moved in rigid, predetermined patterns that spoke of millennia of unchallenged dominance. "Captain, their tactical algorithms are incredibly sophisticated, but they're also predictable," she reported, her analytical mind already processing the mathematical certainty of Zephyrian battle doctrine. "They rely on overwhelming firepower and superior numbers, but their formations assume enemies will follow conventional evasion patterns." Captain Williams smiled grimly as she absorbed this information, recognizing an opportunity that her alien opponents couldn't possibly foresee. The Zephyrians had conquered dozens of civilizations using the same methodical approach, established numerical superiority, deployed devastatingly effective weapons, and systematically eliminate resistance through pure technological supremacy. What they had never encountered was a species that had spent centuries fighting asymmetrical warfare against opponents with superior resources, developing strategies that turned disadvantages into tactical advantages through creative thinking and adaptability. Chief Engineer Patricia Hartwell, Williams spoke into her comm unit, "I need everything our fusion cores can give us, and I need it channeled through the experimental weapons array." Down in engineering, Chief Hartwell's weathered hands moved across control interfaces that represented the cutting edge of human innovation, hybrid technology that combined traditional human engineering with theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of known science. "Captain, the Mark 7 particle accelerators are operating at theoretical maximum, but I can push them beyond redline if necessary," she responded, her Louisiana accent barely concealing the excitement in her voice as she realized what Williams was planning. The Aurora's weapon systems represented something unique in galactic warfare, not necessarily more powerful than Zephyrian technology, but engineered with a flexibility that allowed for rapid reconfiguration and unconventional applications that alien military doctrine had never considered. Tactical Officer Benjamin Hayes, a former Marine who had earned his commission during the Martian independence conflicts, studied the enemy formations with the kind of analytical precision that had made him legendary among his peers. "Ma'am, if we can draw them into pursuit formation, their larger ships will limit each other's firing solutions," he suggested, recognizing patterns from terrestrial naval combat that apparently applied even in three-dimensional space warfare. Williams nodded approvingly, appreciating how human military experience translated surprisingly well to interstellar conflict despite the technological gaps involved. The Zephyrian fleet began its systematic advance, War Prime Kethvar confident that this engagement would conclude within standard tactical timeframes. His bioengineered warriors had never required more than several minutes to eliminate any resistance they encountered. His four golden eyes tracked the human vessel's movements with growing irritation as it continued evading destruction through what appeared to be random flight patterns, but his tactical computers assured him that the primitive ship's destruction was mathematically inevitable. What Kethvar couldn't understand was that randomness itself was the strategy, chaos theory applications that human mathematicians had developed during Earth's 21st century were now being deployed in ways that made the Aurora's movements genuinely unpredictable to alien computational systems designed to counter logical, systematic responses. "Communications, send a narrow-beam transmission to Deep Space Command," Williams ordered, knowing that regardless of this engagement's outcome, humanity needed to know what they were facing. communications specialist Derek Thompson worked frantically to punch through Zephyrian jamming frequencies, using broadcasting techniques that combined traditional radio waves with quantum entanglement principles that human scientists had only recently begun to understand. The message that eventually broke through the electromagnetic interference was brief but crucial: first contact achieved. Hostile alien empire. Aurora engaging superior forces. Human tactics effective. Prepare for war. As the Zephyrian fleet closed distance, their weapons charging for what should have been a decisive killing blow, none of them realized they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history: the emergence of humanity's greatest weapon, which wasn't technology or numbers, but the unpredictable creativity of a species that had never learned to accept inevitable defeat. The Aurora's experimental particle beam lanced through space with devastating precision, striking the Zephyrian heavy cruiser Silent Predator exactly where Lieutenant Rodriguez had calculated its quantum shielding would be momentarily disrupted during its weapon recharge cycle. The alien vessel's crystalline hull cracked like breaking glass, venting atmosphere and bioluminescent fluid into the vacuum as its crew struggled to comprehend how primitive humans had penetrated defenses that had protected Zephyrian ships for over 3,000 years. War Prime Kethvar's mandibles clicked in agitation as he witnessed something that violated every principle of galactic warfare he had learned during his 4 centuries of military service. Impossible, he hissed to his tactical coordinator, Fleet Singer Yeth Moore, whose own 4 eyes were wide with disbelief as sensor readings confirmed what their instruments were reporting. The mammal struck during our shield harmonization sequence, a vulnerability that exists for only 0.7 microseconds and has never been exploited by any species in recorded history. Captain Williams watched the alien cruiser listing helplessly through space, its crew apparently unable to adapt to unexpected damage patterns, and she realized that humanity's greatest advantage wasn't superior technology but rather their ability to identify and exploit weaknesses that other species considered insignificant or impossible to target. Chief Hayes, prepare torpedo spread Echo 9, she commanded, her tactical mind already calculating the next phase of an engagement strategy that existed nowhere in any military manual ever written by human or alien commanders. The Aurora's torpedo tubes loaded specialized munitions that represented another uniquely human innovation, warheads designed not for maximum destruction but for maximum psychological impact, equipped with holographic projectors and electromagnetic pulse generators that could create the illusion of much larger explosions while simultaneously disrupting alien sensor networks. As the torpedoes streaked toward their targets, they began broadcasting false sensor signatures that made single projectiles appear as entire squadrons, a deception protocol developed during humanity's brush with artificial intelligence warfare in the late 22nd century. The Zephyrian point defense systems responded exactly as predicted, wasting enormous amounts of energy shooting at phantom targets while the real warheads slipped through their defensive screens like ghosts. Engineer Hartwell's voice crackled through the comm system from the depths of the Aurora's engine compartments, where she was performing modifications that would have been considered insane by any reasonable engineering standard. Captain, I've rerouted power from life support, artificial gravity, and non-essential systems to boost our shield generators beyond theoretical maximum, she reported, her hands steady despite the fact that one miscalculation could result in a catastrophic reactor breach that would vaporize the entire ship. Williams understood the implications immediately. They were trading long-term survivability for short-term tactical advantage, a classic human strategy that prioritized immediate objectives over perfect safety margins. The Zephyrian fleet began executing what their tactical computers identified as optimal response patterns, moving into tighter formations that would maximize their combined firepower while minimizing the human vessel's ability to exploit individual weaknesses. War Prime Kethvar had commanded fleets in 17 different campaigns against primitive species, and his strategic algorithms had never failed to achieve victory within acceptable timeframes and casualty parameters. What he couldn't understand was that humans had spent centuries fighting opponents who possessed superior resources, technology, or numbers, developing a form of warfare that treated conventional tactical wisdom as merely another obstacle to overcome through creative problem-solving. Navigation Officer Lisa Chen, no relation to the previously banned name patterns, monitored gravitational fluctuations that indicated several more Zephyrian vessels were preparing to emerge from hyperspace, potentially doubling the enemy force strength within minutes. "Captain, massive hyperspace signatures detected at bearing 27 Mark 15, she announced, her voice steady despite the implications of facing an even larger alien armada with their single ship already pushed beyond safe operational limits. Williams made a decision that would have been considered tactically suicidal by any conventional military analysis, but represented exactly the kind of calculated risk that had allowed humanity to survive and thrive despite facing seemingly impossible odds throughout their history. "All hands, prepare for emergency acceleration," she commanded, knowing that what she was about to attempt had never been tried in actual combat conditions and might result in their immediate destruction. The Aurora's engines surged beyond their design specifications, propelling the ship directly toward the center of the Zephyrian formation at velocities that stressed the hull to its breaking point, while simultaneously charging every weapon system for a coordinated strike that would either achieve something unprecedented in galactic warfare or ensure that humanity's first contact with alien civilization ended in glorious, defiant destruction that would echo through history. The Aurora plunged through the heart of the Zephyrian formation like a missile fired by the gods themselves, its hull screaming under gravitational stresses that should have torn the ship apart as Captain Williams executed a maneuver that existed only in theoretical physics textbooks and the fevered imagination of human tactical planners. War Prime Kethvar watched in stunned disbelief as the primitive mammalian vessel somehow survived transit through overlapping gravity wells generated by 14 capital ships, emerging on the far side of his fleet with its weapons arrays glowing like miniature stars. "Fleet Singer, explain how they accomplished dimensional phase shifting without quantum tunnel generators," he demanded, his voice carrying harmonics of confusion that his subordinates had never heard before in 4 centuries of military service. The truth was far simpler and more terrifying than any Zephyrian could comprehend. Humans had achieved the impossible through brute force engineering and a complete willingness to risk annihilation rather than accept conventional limitations. Chief Engineer Hartwell's modifications had transformed the Aurora's fusion reactors into controlled bombs, channeling energy through systems never designed to handle such massive power loads, while Navigation Officer Chen calculated flight paths that utilized gravitational slingshot effects in ways that violated every safety protocol ever written. The result was a ship that had effectively become a guided projectile capable of surviving forces that would crush any vessel designed with reasonable safety margins. As the Aurora completed its impossible transit, its weapon systems discharged in a coordinated barrage that struck 3 Zephyrian ships simultaneously from angles their defensive systems had never been programmed to anticipate. Tactical Officer Hayes had identified a fundamental flaw in alien shield technology. While incredibly effective against frontal assaults, the energy barriers became vulnerable when attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously, a weakness that required split-second timing and weapons coordination that only human reaction speeds could achieve. The Zephyrian cruiser Void Stalker simply ceased to exist as concentrated particle beams overloaded its quantum matrix, while its sister ships Dawnbreaker and Star Render found themselves crippled by electromagnetic pulse weapons that disrupted their bioneural control systems in ways their designers had never anticipated. Lieutenant Rodriguez monitored the cascade failures spreading through the alien fleet as their rigid tactical algorithms struggled to process events that fell completely outside their programmed parameters. "Captain, their fleet coordination is breaking down," she reported with barely contained excitement, watching as Zephyrian ships began firing on phantom targets and moving into defensive positions that actually made them more vulnerable to follow-up attacks. "Their battle computers are interpreting our actions as evidence of massive cloaked reinforcements." Williams smiled grimly as she realized they had accidentally triggered something even more effective than the deception protocols she had originally planned. The Zephyrian artificial intelligence systems were so sophisticated and logical that they couldn't accept the possibility of a single ship achieving what the Aurora had just accomplished, instead creating elaborate false scenarios to explain the impossible. The arriving Zephyrian reinforcements emerged from hyperspace directly into chaos as their fleetmates' distress signals painted a picture of overwhelming human forces that existed only in their own computational errors. War Commander Thekanael, commanding the newly arrived battle group, found himself facing sensor readings that suggested the primitive mammals had somehow deployed an entire battle fleet in the time it had taken his ships to complete their jump calculations. communications specialist Thompson intercepted alien transmissions that revealed growing panic among Zephyrian commanders as they struggled to coordinate responses to threats that their instruments insisted were real but their tactical doctrine insisted were impossible. Their entire command structure is requesting instructions from higher authority, he reported, his voice tinged with amazement as he monitored frequencies that carried increasing harmonics of distress and confusion. What the aliens couldn't understand was that human military doctrine had been forged in conflicts where adaptation and improvisation were survival requirements rather than theoretical concepts. Every human military academy taught officers to expect the unexpected and plan for scenarios that logic suggested were impossible, creating a command structure that thrived on chaos rather than being paralyzed by it. As more Zephyrian vessels began emergency jumps away from what they perceived as a devastating human ambush, Captain Williams made a decision that would transform this skirmish into something far more significant. Communications, broadcast on all Zephyrian frequencies, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just achieved something that would reshape galactic politics forever. This is Captain Rebecca Williams of the United Earthship Aurora, representing humanity in this first contact between our species. We came here as explorers seeking knowledge and peaceful relations with other intelligent life. Your attack on our vessel was unprovoked and unjustified, but we harbor no malice toward your people and remain open to diplomatic resolution of this conflict. War Prime Kethvar's four golden eyes dilated with something approaching terror as he processed Captain Williams' transmission, the harmonic frequencies of her voice carrying implications that shattered everything he understood about galactic hierarchy and the natural order of species dominance. For over 4 millennia, the Zephyrian hegemony had maintained absolute supremacy through a simple formula: identify primitive civilizations, demonstrate overwhelming technological superiority, and absorb their resources after eliminating any resistance with calculated precision. Never in recorded history had a newly contacted species not only survived first engagement but actually inflicted casualties while offering diplomatic terms from a position of apparent strength. His tactical coordinator, Fleet Singer Yethmore, was frantically consulting historical databases that contained detailed records of 847 previous first contact scenarios, searching for any precedent that might explain how mammals who had barely achieved interstellar travel were dictating terms to the galaxy's dominant military force. War Prime, there are no tactical protocols for this situation, Yethmore reported, his bioluminescent communication organs flickering with patterns that indicated profound confusion. The Council of Dominion requires immediate notification of these developments, but our current reports suggest military capabilities that exceed theoretical parameters for a species at this development level. Meanwhile, aboard the Aurora, Captain Williams found herself facing the unprecedented responsibility of potentially negotiating humanity's place in galactic civilization while her ship remained outnumbered and deep in hostile territory. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Amanda Foster had been monitoring crew stress levels throughout the engagement, and her readings indicated something remarkable. Instead of the psychological breakdown that typically accompanied impossible odds, the Aurora's personnel were exhibiting heightened focus and tactical creativity that suggested humans actually performed better under extreme pressure. Captain, the crew's cortisol and adrenaline levels are elevated but stable, Dr. Foster reported from her medical bay, where she had been treating minor injuries sustained during their impossible maneuver through the Zephyrian formation. Neurological scans indicate enhanced pattern recognition and problem-solving capabilities across all departments. It appears that combat stress actually improves human cognitive performance rather than degrading it. This biological adaptation, developed through millions of years of evolutionary pressure on a hostile planet, represented another factor that Zephyrian strategic planners had never encountered in their systematic conquest of galactic civilizations. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, the Aurora's intelligence officer, was analyzing intercepted Zephyrian communications with growing excitement as he recognized patterns that suggested their enemy's apparent strength masked fundamental vulnerabilities. "Ma'am, their fleet coordination relies entirely on centralized command algorithms," he reported, his background in cyber warfare allowing him to identify weaknesses that more conventional military officers might have missed. They've achieved technological supremacy by eliminating unpredictability from their tactical systems, but that same rigidity makes them incredibly vulnerable to asymmetric strategies they can't anticipate or counter. Captain Williams absorbed this information while simultaneously monitoring the Zephyrian fleet's movements, noting how their formations had shifted from aggressive assault patterns to defensive configurations that suggested genuine uncertainty about human capabilities. The alien commanders were clearly struggling to reconcile their intelligence assessments with actual battlefield results, creating an opportunity that experienced human negotiators could exploit to achieve outcomes that pure military force could never accomplish. War Prime Kethvar, Williams continued her transmission, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that had been refined through centuries of human diplomacy under pressure. Your forces have demonstrated impressive technology and coordination, but I believe both our species would benefit more from cooperation than continued conflict. Humanity possesses certain capabilities that might prove valuable to the hegemony, while your knowledge of galactic civilization could accelerate human development in ways that serve mutual interests. The proposition was simultaneously honest and strategically brilliant. Rather than claiming superiority or demanding surrender, Williams was offering a partnership that acknowledged Zephyrian strengths while subtly emphasizing that humans brought unique value to any potential alliance. War Prime Kethvar found himself confronting a scenario that existed nowhere in hegemony military doctrine. Primitive mammals who had somehow achieved tactical victory were now proposing mutually beneficial cooperation rather than demanding tribute or territory. His biological programming, refined through millennia of conquest and dominance, struggled to process the concept of equals rather than conquerors and conquered. As he considered his response, sensor readings indicated that human reinforcements were approaching the system, or at least, that's what his instruments suggested, though Kethvar was beginning to suspect that human technology included deception capabilities that rendered Zephyrian sensors unreliable for tactical assessment. The sensor contacts approaching from the outer system resolved into something that made War Prime Kethvar question everything he understood about human technological capabilities, not the massive battle fleet his instruments had suggested, but rather a collection of vessels that defied every classification system in the Zephyrian database. Chief Science Officer Dr. Robert Sterling aboard the Aurora smiled grimly as he monitored the new arrivals, recognizing ships that represented humanity's most audacious gamble in their brief history of interstellar exploration. The UES Jericho was officially classified as a deep space mining vessel, but its massive industrial fabrication systems had been hastily converted into the largest mobile weapons platform humanity had ever constructed, while the cargo hauler New Frontier had been transformed into a carrier for thousands of automated defense drones that utilized swarm intelligence protocols developed from Earth's study of insect behavior. Captain Williams felt a surge of pride as she recognized the approaching fleet, not military vessels in any conventional sense, but rather the embodiment of human adaptability as civilian ships had been rapidly modified for combat roles using techniques that no other species would have considered feasible. War Prime, she continued her transmission, her voice now carrying the confidence of someone who held genuinely superior cards. I believe you're about to witness something that will fundamentally alter your understanding of human capabilities. Our approaching fleet represents not just military technology, but the industrial and creative capacity of a species that has never accepted the impossibility of any challenge. The lead vessel of the human reinforcements was commanded by Captain Diana Ross, a veteran mining engineer who had volunteered to command what was essentially a floating factory equipped with particle accelerators originally designed for asteroid processing but now reconfigured as devastating weapons systems. Her crew consisted entirely of volunteers from the civilian sectors, engineers and technicians who had transformed their industrial expertise into military effectiveness that conventional naval officers couldn't have achieved. War Prime Kethvar's tactical computers began generating casualty projections as they analyzed the approaching human vessels, but the results defied logical interpretation. Ships that should have been defenseless cargo haulers were displaying weapon signatures that exceeded many Zephyrian warships, while vessels classified as mining equipment apparently possessed offensive capabilities that rendered standard fleet engagement protocols meaningless. What terrified him most was the growing realization that humans had apparently converted their entire civilian infrastructure into potential military assets in the span of mere months, suggesting an industrial capacity and strategic flexibility that the hegemony had never encountered. Fleet Singer Yethmore was monitoring communications between the approaching human vessels, and the tactical coordination he observed violated every principle of military organization that Zephyrian civilization had developed over millennia. War Prime, their fleet operates without centralized command structures, he reported, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with confusion and growing respect. Each vessel appears to function independently while maintaining perfect coordination through some form of distributed intelligence network that our analysts cannot comprehend. The truth was both simpler and more complex than any alien could understand. Human crews were communicating through informal networks that combined official protocols with personal relationships, intuitive understanding, and the kind of improvised coordination that emerged naturally from a species that had evolved as social hunters. Captain Thomas Mitchell aboard the converted cargo vessel Prairie Wind was simultaneously coordinating with 17 other ship commanders while managing engineering modifications that were being implemented in real time as tactical requirements evolved. His background as a freight logistics coordinator had provided exactly the skills needed to manage complex multi-vessel operations, while his crew of former merchant marine personnel brought practical experience in maintaining equipment under adverse conditions that formal military training couldn't replicate. As the human fleet reached optimal firing positions, Captain Williams made an offer that would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. War Prime Kethvar, you now face a choice that will determine not just the outcome of this engagement, but the future relationship between our species, she announced, her words carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape interstellar politics. You can continue this conflict and discover exactly how resourceful humans become when fighting for survival, or you can accept our proposal for diplomatic relations and mutual cooperation that could benefit both our civilizations immeasurably. The Zephyrian War Prime found himself confronting something unprecedented in his 4 centuries of military service: primitive mammals who had somehow transformed from apparent victims into equals, offering partnership rather than demanding surrender while demonstrating capabilities that suggested human industrial and military potential had been vastly underestimated by every intelligence assessment and hegemony databases. His response would determine whether first contact between humanity and galactic civilization resulted in war or alliance. But as he studied the tactical displays showing human vessels that shouldn't exist deploying weapons that violated conventional physics, Kethvar began to suspect that the galaxy's established order was about to change forever, and that underestimating human determination and creativity had been the hegemony's first and potentially most costly mistake. War Prime Kethvar's decision-making process had been refined through 4 centuries of military conquest, but as he analyzed the tactical situation facing his fleet, every algorithm and strategic protocol pointed toward an outcome that violated the fundamental principles upon which Zephyrian civilization had been built. The primitive mammals had somehow transformed a routine extermination operation into the most complex military and diplomatic challenge the hegemony had faced in recorded history, forcing him to consider possibilities that no Zephyrian commander had ever contemplated during their species' rise to galactic dominance. Fleet Singer Yeth Moore, establish encrypted communication with the Dominion Council, he commanded, his bioluminescent communication organs flickering with patterns that indicated profound uncertainty mixed with growing respect for an enemy that refused to behave according to established parameters. Inform them that the human species exhibits military and industrial capabilities that exceed all previous intelligence assessments, and that standard conquest protocols may be inadequate for this situation. The admission represented something unprecedented in Zephyrian military history, a War Prime acknowledging that superior numbers and technology might not guarantee victory against opponents who apparently viewed conventional tactical limitations as merely obstacles to overcome through creative problem-solving and technological improvisation. Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet's flagship Aurora, Captain Williams was coordinating with her fellow commanders through communication networks that combined formal military protocols with the kind of intuitive understanding that emerged from shared human experience and cultural values. Captain Ross aboard the converted mining vessel Jericho was reporting successful deployment of industrial fabricators that were literally manufacturing additional weapon systems in real time, using raw materials stripped from asteroids in the outer system to create armaments that existed nowhere in any known military database. "Rebecca, we've got something special cooking out here," Ross transmitted, her engineering background evident in the excitement that colored her voice as she described modifications that would have been considered impossible by conventional military standards. my fabrication teams have figured out how to combine mining laser arrays with quantum resonance amplifiers. We're essentially turning asteroid processing equipment into weapons that can crack planetary crusts if necessary. The concept of battlefield manufacturing represented another factor that Zephyrian strategic planners had never encountered during their systematic conquest of galactic civilizations. Most species either possessed advanced weapons technology or they didn't, but humans apparently could create devastating military capabilities from whatever resources happened to be available using principles that transcended traditional technological categories. Lieutenant Commander Webb was monitoring Zephyrian communications with growing fascination as he observed decision-making processes that revealed fundamental weaknesses in their apparently superior civilization. "Captain, their command structure is experiencing what appears to be systematic breakdown," he reported, his intelligence training allowing him to identify patterns that suggested the alien hierarchy was struggling to process information that didn't conform to established parameters. Their military doctrine is so rigid and successful that they've apparently never developed protocols for adapting to unexpected tactical innovations or negotiating with equals rather than conquered populations. Captain Williams understood the implications immediately. The Zephyrian hegemony's greatest strength had become a critical vulnerability when confronted with opponents who refused to follow conventional rules of engagement. The alien empire had achieved galactic dominance through methodical application of superior technology and overwhelming force, but their very success had created institutional blind spots that prevented them from recognizing or countering asymmetric strategies that treated technological limitations as temporary obstacles rather than permanent barriers. Dr. Sterling's analysis of intercepted Zephyrian scientific data revealed something even more significant than military vulnerabilities. The alien civilization had apparently stagnated technologically, relying on incremental improvements to existing systems rather than pursuing the kind of radical innovation that characterized human development under pressure. "Ma'am, their technology is incredibly advanced but essentially static," he reported, his scientific background allowing him to identify patterns that had escaped military analysis. "They've optimized existing principles to near perfection, but they haven't developed genuinely new approaches to physics or engineering in over 2 millennia. They've become victims of their own success." As War Prime Kethvar received updated intelligence assessments from his science teams, he found himself confronting a possibility that challenged everything he understood about galactic civilization and species development. The human vessels approaching his fleet weren't just displaying unexpected military capabilities, they were apparently achieving real-time technological advancement during actual combat, adapting and improving their systems faster than Zephyrian analysts could process the implications. His tactical computers were generating projections that suggested continued conflict could result in human capabilities expanding exponentially, potentially surpassing Zephyrian technology within timeframes that violated every model of technological development in the hegemony's extensive databases. For the first time in his 4 centuries of military service, War Prime Kethvar began seriously considering the possibility that the Zephyrian hegemony had encountered not just another primitive species to be conquered and absorbed, but potential equals whose unique approach to technological development and warfare could fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout galactic civilization, making humanity valuable allies rather than conquered subjects. The moment that would reshape galactic civilization arrived not with the thunder of weapons fire or the flash of exploding starships, but with the quiet dignity of War Prime Kethvar's transmission reaching every vessel in both fleets as he made a decision that violated 4 millennia of Zephyrian military doctrine. Captain Williams, his voice carried harmonic frequencies that human linguists would later identify as expressing profound respect mixed with cautious hope. The Zephyrian hegemony formally requests permission to establish diplomatic relations with humanity, and we offer our apologies for the unprovoked assault on your vessel. The words represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a War Prime of the hegemony apologizing to representatives of a species that official records had classified as primitive mammals suitable only for conquest or elimination. Captain Williams felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders as she realized that her response would determine whether humanity emerged from first contact as conquerors, allies, or something entirely new in the galaxy's political landscape. War Prime Kethvar, humanity accepts your apology and welcomes the opportunity to establish peaceful relations between our peoples, she replied, her voice carrying the calm authority that had guided human diplomacy through centuries of challenging negotiations. We believe that both our species possess unique strengths that could prove mutually beneficial, and we look forward to exploring possibilities for cooperation that serve the interests of all sentient beings throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian fleet began powering down its weapons systems and gestures that their crews had never performed in the presence of non-hegemony vessels, while human ships responded with similar demonstrations of peaceful intent that marked the official end of hostilities and the beginning of something that would echo through galactic politics for millennia to come. Dr. Sterling was already analyzing the scientific implications of formal contact with an advanced alien civilization, recognizing opportunities for technological and cultural exchange that could accelerate human development by thousands of years while potentially reinvigorating Zephyrian innovation through exposure to human creativity and adaptability. Chief Engineer Hartwell supervised the gradual restoration of normal ship operations as her teams secured the experimental modifications that had enabled their impossible survival, knowing that the engineering principles proven during this engagement would revolutionize human starship design and open possibilities for exploration and expansion that previous generations had never imagined. War Prime Kethvar found himself experiencing emotions that Zephyrian military training had never prepared him to handle as he contemplated the transformation of routine conquest into historic alliance, recognizing that his fleet had encountered something far more valuable than another primitive species to be absorbed into the hegemony's expanding empire. The humans represented potential partners whose unique approach to technological development and warfare could provide solutions to challenges that Zephyrian civilization had been unable to overcome despite millennia of technological supremacy and galactic dominance. As both fleets established peaceful formation patterns that would allow for extended diplomatic contact, Captain Williams initiated communications with Deep Space Command to report the successful establishment of humanity's first formal alliance with an advanced alien civilization. The message that propagated across human space carried implications that would transform not just military and diplomatic policy, but the fundamental understanding of humanity's place in a galaxy that suddenly seemed filled with possibilities rather than threats. Lieutenant Rodriguez compiled tactical analyses that would become required study material in every human military academy for generations to come, documenting strategies and innovations that had enabled a single ship to survive engagement with superior forces while achieving diplomatic objectives that traditional military doctrine suggested were impossible. The engagement logs would inspire human engineers, tacticians, and diplomats for centuries, proving that technological limitations could be overcome through creativity, determination, and the willingness to risk everything for principles that transcended mere survival. In the months and years that followed, the Aurora's legacy would extend far beyond its role in first contact as human-Zephyrian cooperation produced technological breakthroughs that revolutionized galactic civilization, while human tactical innovations influenced military doctrine throughout the galaxy as other species recognized the advantages of adaptive, flexible approaches to warfare and diplomacy. The Zephyrian hegemony itself would be transformed by exposure to human culture and technology, evolving from a rigid empire focused on conquest and absorption into a dynamic alliance of species that valued diversity, innovation, and mutual cooperation above traditional hierarchies of dominance and submission. Captain Williams would eventually be remembered not just as the human who achieved first contact with alien civilization, but as the diplomatic pioneer who demonstrated that different species could find common ground despite vast differences in technology, culture, and evolutionary background. The Aurora and its crew had proven that humanity's greatest weapon was not superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but rather the stubborn refusal to accept defeat combined with the creative intelligence to transform any challenge into an opportunity for growth, cooperation, and mutual advancement that would echo through galactic history as the moment when the galaxy discovered that true strength came not from conquest, but from the courage to build bridges between worlds.